Do you work for the school social worker? Yeah.
He's in prison and all those.
That's good. That's all right.
Where, and then my country takes.
I'm Michelle.
LA. No, we
LA.
don't want that. We want people out and let them access it to the community, and that's the difference.
I think we're waiting a few minutes till they're ready.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, you too.
Well,
You guys are rightish, right? If I get started.
yeah.
Do not want this.
Are you chairing now?
I'm just passing the baton.
Wait one
to
second.
Sophia.
You'll start, and then Michelle will start.
Okay.
So before you go, or maybe if you want to,
Hi. Hi. Good to see you. Good to see you.
just to make a quick announcement about something that's happening.
30 seconds. Okay. I don't want to take into your time.
I'm just really Vanna White.
Okay.
Let's wait 1 minute until they're settled, and then we'll go into the building.
Perfect.
You guys good down here?
We're amazing. Yeah.
So we have these big massive prisons at home.
Have you seen Shonda?
Shauna's probably in 304.
Taking the pastoral mechanisms from here into our countries where it's totally different. Our laws are different. We, like I said, you know, the majority of people
For us,
we don't.
and are there organizations or are there just
60 years just which is awesome. And then a big representation.
And we have live set mandatory life. They're eligible for parole after 20 years.
So it's good.
And most people will get parole.
How's it been up here? This is my first time up here.
This is my mate from Chicago.
You want to?
I'm just going to go and say hello.
yes, yeah. Around strategy, you have to sell out if you're going to get away. And it was an honest, and it was.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah,
I mean, that's
it was honest.
It's generative.
It was honest. It was generative. And people who were sliding into complicity got to think, shit,
That's right. That's right. Hey, boo. Oh, double hug. Hi, double hug. Good. Thank you. I got myself. Well, no, well, you know. I can't. Isn't it so good? I can do all things through Black women. We strengthen me. Yes, we can. Very easily.
Yeah, we'll have some Chicago people tonight.
In our single time. That's what we talked about. That's cool. They took a whole bunch of them. We're going to do a little talking and then we're going to open it up for questions. Okay. Does that work? Yes? Okay, good. Okay. So I'm just going to announce it to the people because there have been a couple comments about like where the youth. Okay. Fast. Well, we're going to go first and then they're going to go last portion. Yeah?
And I feel like we could.
Yeah. Maybe. We have a closing ceremony at 5 o'clock. That's happening
I know.
Exactly. We're going to do flower crowns and affirmations. Be a part of that. There are flower crowns. Okay, there are actual real flower crowns created by Black women. It's going to be amazing. Yep. Yeah, I'm ready whenever.
Oh no, Paula just went to the restroom.
Oh.
It's something about.
Let's go. Let's go. Let's go.
You know I gotta do it.
You can't help yourself. I appreciate you for it.
I do like all these things. Oh, remember that time? And you're like, oh, no.
But real talk, the sister was putting me onto
You're sitting in college.
like museum and library. I'm tap into archives. It's always one way. And it's essential. Because she said that she she found stuff in the 1930s and 40s. Notes, meeting notes, all kinds of stuff. Okay. And we're always a little bit dragged by I don't think
Yeah. No, I'm not going to
Just like that. So, I'll get you some in
That's right.
I have some.
yeah.
And it's okay. It's best said in Spanish.
tell me what to say.
Yeah.
Go get it.
It's Teresa. Yeah. And that's how we say
How do you say?
Teresa.
Yes.
Like
Yes.
Teresa. Yeah.
Here at home it's Teresa. In Australia it's Teresa. Teresa.
You're in the long term.
I'm ready, just so you know.
I hear you. I don't think it will, but I think you're right too. Yeah. I'm in a funny body.
Yes, right. Yes, exactly. Yes. But is it? But you know what? See,
Just gave me Did you get cards?
They're coming.
All right. And then we're going to need 3 people to pick them up.
That I can do.
All right. Sophia, there's an announcement, there's a me, and there's a you. Is that good?
yeah.
I'm just doing 2 minutes. Can I introduce you as Executive Director of Lions? No, I don't know. I haven't checked my phone.
Sorry. Yeah, that's fine. I'm just like, yeah, we can make that happen.
Set up some side time.
Yeah. Is that a real question? I'm sorry. Oh, yes? Okay, great. Greetings, everyone. Hi. Peace. We're going to get ready to start. I just have a quick announcement. My name is Wakumi Douglas. I'm the executive director and founder of Soul Sisters Leadership Collective. And we are hosting a youth summit that's taking place downstairs. And I just wanted to make sure that everybody up here knew that that was going on, that we have a number of young people who are directly impacted by mass incarceration and or are activists around these issues who are building and connecting and doing political education work downstairs on the sea level and upstairs on the 4th floor. And during the next session, during the workshop that's entitled #Say Her Magic Matters, the youth will be giving a report back and we'll be sharing about the conversations and stories that they've been engaged in together. And so I just wanted to extend a formal invitation to anybody who's interested in hearing a youth perspective on these issues to please come. So that's going to be at CO5, that youth report back, and during the next session, okay? Thank you.
Oh, I gotta say, before Wakumi leaves, we have to say something about her. Oh. Wakumi was a student here at the School of Social Work quite a lot of years ago. Go on, okay, clap about that, but actually there's something else. She was the person that came up with the idea of doing a conference here, and it was at that time, that year, I believe she named it Remove the Bars. This was about 9 years ago. It was her idea. This conference is her idea, all right? And I want to tell a story, which is how this happened, which is she was chair for the second year of something called the Criminal Justice Caucus. And the caucus was an organization that had just started the year before about trying to bring issues of criminal justice into the School of Social Work. And when she came and became the next year's chair of it, and she said, let's do a conference, the administration said to her, "You're just a student. You can't really do a conference." They were like, "Well, we're doing a lecture. Maybe you could have a table at the lecture." And she was like, "Are you kidding? We're doing a conference." And that was the first Beyond the Bars conference.
So that's how you do it. Is this somebody else's phone? Cameron? Oh, it's Sophia's. Cool. Well, we're back. Did everybody have a good enough lunch? All right. So the second panel allowed us to embody, enact, bear witness to sparks within the movement in this country. And I actually really want to thank the people who organized this and those who participated for allowing us to bear witness to tensions in a movement, because those are usually behind the scene or on Instagram or something creepier. And there was something quite gorgeous and difficult. And as, again, I'm talking particularly the students among us, but not only, as we are all in positions where we might slide to complicity or compromise or cut a deal because it looks like it's the moment to do it, we need to be aware of the questions about who's being left out, who's being left. You're not going to sleep well, okay? And you're certainly not going to sit comfortably on a panel. So we're going to shift now from looking at within the U.S. to transnational stories of, the session is called Sisters Across Borders. And again, I just want to honor the speakers and Sophia Elijah, who's always an amazing moderator. Sophia Elijah is the executive director of the Alliance of Families for Justice. But I think what's going to happen is, woo-woo, yeah, thank you. Sorry, I forgot my woo-woo. I think what I hope is that we get enough of the sense of what's happening in each place and then thinking about solidarities across. Because sometimes in transnational conversations, we only talk about the common links and not the particularities. And sometimes when we go deep on the particularities, we lose the potential for solidarity. So these are obviously countries with very different histories of war, of conflict, of colonialism, of intra-national tensions, and the role of the United States is always implicated. So I'm going to let Sophia introduce the panel. Midway through the panel, index cards will start floating into your laps. We would like you to jot down questions, because that's how we're going to manage the conversation, because we assume there will be a lot of questions. Some might be overlapping. So during the session, just jot down questions. We will gather those and then try to be as responsive as possible. Does that work for you? And now, woo-woo, Sophia Elijah.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I am hoping that no one has come with the itis. If you ate your lunch, you jogged around the block so that you're awake for the afternoon. Yes? If we catch you snoring, you know what's going to happen. Our panelists are awake, yeah? Okay. So I'm going to first just introduce them, just their names, so that you have that, and then I'm going to ask them questions that allow you to get to know more about them, right? So first, to my immediate left is Wala Gusien. Then to her left is Teresa Njorong. I was going to say that. Okay. And then to her left is Debbie Kilroy. And to her left is Luz Piedad. Okay. Pretty good, right? And then to Luz's left is Carletta, who's going to help with translation when needed. Okay? So we're going to jump right in. You know, we in the United States have been socialized to believe that we are the center of the world, and that whatever happens here is kind of the, the gold star, for what happens around the world, and we tend to lose track that there are people in other parts of the world fighting the good fight, and sometimes fighting the better fight than we are, right? I'm just saying. And there are systems and lessons to be learned from our sisters and brothers around the world, and this panel is designed for us to learn from our sisters who came from across the globe to share with us. So, to the degree that we're able to shed that old fashioned American arrogance, as you're thinking about your questions, frame them in such a way that it gives you an opportunity to learn and not think that you have to tell the panelists what's so good or horrible in the United States. Okay? Because they probably know what's so horrible in the United States, which is why they're not trying to stay here. Okay. So, with that, we're going to start off with this question. And I'll ask each panelist to answer it. And why don't we just go straight down this line? So I will ask you briefly introduce yourself and tell us the name of your organization, if you have one, and what is its mission in your country. And let's share the mic.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Wala Al Ghussein. I'm currently a master's student of Middle Eastern Studies at CUNY, the Graduate Center. I came from Palestine, Gaza 2 years ago. I used to be a local journalist, basically as it's Gaza, so it's a war journalist that I covered the field and different stories of like war and like social issues and like humanitarian issues. I work with different media outlets here, and I'm currently organizing with the organization Existence is Resistance to take people to Palestine from the U.S. to the part where I am from Gaza cannot even go to. So I'm organizing people to go to a place that I and people like me from Gaza cannot or never went to. So this is what I do right now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you all. Teresa.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
In my country, we say habari and you say mzuri. So habari,
Enjoy.
welcome to Nairobi. Yeah, my name is Teresa Njoroge and I'm from Nairobi, Kenya. And I set up a social enterprise while I was serving a sentence at the largest correctional facility for women in Nairobi, Langata Women Maximum Prison, with my daughter. She was only 3 months old when we went with her to prison. And I set up a social enterprise called Clean Start, which empowers and inspires women, girls, and children who are caught up in the criminal justice system in Kenya, the juvenile justice system, and we build bridges for them, connect the dots for them to reintegrate back into the community, back into education, entrepreneurship, or whatever it is that they can do to, have decent, sustainable means of livelihood so that they do not go back into the correctional institutions. And of course, working with different government agencies that have, one way or the other impacted or contributed towards this, we going into prison. Ministry of Education, the judiciary, and other stakeholders who contribute to that revolving door. Yeah. Thank you. And it's such a pleasure. It's such an honor to be here. Thank you so much for opening your doors to include us. I'll use a quote from your sister, Maya Angelou. May she rest in peace. I come as one, but I stand as 10,000. So I come here as one, but representing thousands of women, girls, and children who are locked up as we sit here in detention centers, in prisons, back home in Kenya, but in Africa as well. I carry those voices with me as I represent them in this conference. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you, Teresa. Debbie.
Hi. Thank you. I'd like to also thank Kathy and Cheryl for the invitation. Before I continue, I want to acknowledge that we are an unceded Lenape territory here, where we gather today. I reside on unceded Mianjin country, which is what colonisers call Brisbane in Australia. I'd like to acknowledge the elders, past, present and emerging, that are here, and pay my respects to the first owners of this territory. I'm a woman who's been in prison. I was in and out of prison from the age of 13, and the last time I was in prison, when I walked out, I came back into the prison as a free woman, and we started Sisters Inside, myself and the long-termers and lifers in the prison that I was in. It was called Bogger Road, an old prison back in on Meanjin country. Basically, what we're about is nothing about us without us. That's the reality. We ensure that we sit at every table no matter what, and we don't compromise. We hold the ground about what our sisters are telling us inside the prison and those that are released from prison. That's a must. And we always ask the question, in whose interests are we acting? And that's what we hold in the forefronts of our mind. So we provide a lot of services, advocacy, activism, a lot of campaigns. We also have a law firm attached because from being in prison, I studied social work and then lawyer. I'm now a lawyer, so I studied law. And I'm the first lawyer that has a very serious criminal history in my jurisdiction that's been admitted to practice. So I have a law firm, and so we represent a lot of the women and girls in their criminal matters. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you, Debbie.
Okay, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Pleasure to be with you. It's not open. Okay. That's a good beginning. Good afternoon again. I came from Colombia. It's a pleasure to be with you today. I ask you please to be patient with my English. Sometimes I don't find the words. So because of that, Coletta is near me to help me and to help me to be more a better speaker. I'm an anthropologist, I'm feminist, and I'm working in an organization, a non-governmental organization that work on human rights, on women human rights. And we work with broad issues about the violence that impact women. One of them was the armed conflict, how the armed conflict affected the life of women. And also we work with women that was incarcerated. Then I want to explain why we do this kind of work. But in this moment, it is important to say that our work with incarcerated women was inspired in the National Council of Incarcerated Women from the United States. So it is very important to me to be here because it is the first time I can look what you do about this issue, and I'm sure that when I'm returned to my country, I can share with all the women that was incarcerated and a group who with whom we work, how you deal with these issues. So it's a very good opportunity to me to be here, and it's a pleasure.
Thank you. So that sets a great tone because now we're going to shift a little bit, and the folks in here from the U.S. know very clearly that the politics in the country, including 45, has a large impact on what we're able to accomplish as far as advocacy. But I would imagine same holds true in other parts of the world. And with that, I'll ask, since oftentimes a country's political climate plays a decisive factor in who and what are criminalized, can you tell us whether this is true in your country, in each of your countries? And I guess we'll go back to you, Luz, and we'll come back this way.
Okay. Perhaps for you it's very common to listen about Colombia on the drug problem. We are the first producer of not cocaine exactly, but the crop where the cocaine was come out, is the coca plant. And because we are the principal seller of cocaine or of base of coca to other countries, we have a big problem. And United States has a big influence in our politics. And that means that many of the people that was in prison in Colombia are involved in one of the crimes about drugs. The most the woman that was in prison in this moment, the 48% of women that was in prison in this moment was in prison because of drugs, because they are transporting drugs or they sell drugs, or because they use their houses to have drugs. There are really the most poor woman of the women that was in this situation. So in our country, the most big problem was the relation between the problem of drugs and the armed conflict. Since the 80s, more or less, these two issues are mixed, and many of the money that came from the drugs go to the war. And also this is a reason because of United States began to have a very interest on our country, and he used the drug problem to fight the guerrillas and to demand to our country to control the problem of drugs. And that means that we spend a lot of money to try to resolve the problem of drugs. A part of this money came from the United States, but it is not the most big percentage. And also we have the big casualties, civil casualties, because of the persecution and war on drugs. And we also have a gender stereotype, gender stereotypes that was strong in many of our regions. Why? Because
I know we're popular, but could we put the
when
lights
we
back
live
on?
in a country that resolve the problems with fighting with arms, the masculinities, they strengthen masculinity on men. They strengthen the bias about the men, that men resolve their conflicts and the authoritarianism. It's a support of patriarchy. And also we have in the other side women that think that is good to be an object, because in this way they can have a relation with a man, and the man also demand that on women. So all of these issues also increase the violence against women. So there are not the people that was in prison. It is not the men that fight women or rape women that are more in prison. But I say that to explain what is the behavior of our country. And there are another issue very important is our country is one of the most deep difference that have the most deep difference between poor and rich. So the first crime because of the man who was in jail was crimes, stole crimes. robbery exactly. And in women, the first is drugs, and the second one is robbery. So it's the armed conflict, is the poverty and the deep of the gap between poor and rich that influence in the people that was perceived by the justice and in our country.
Wow. Wow. Thank you, Luz. Okay, the same question to you, Debbie. How does the political climate in Australia impact who's incarcerated and for what?
I think we all know that any political party that's in power will always persuade, you know, the laws and define behaviours that become criminalised. Behavior, or or anything that we ingest in our bodies that becomes criminalised. And what we see at home is the criminalisation of poverty. So our country is young in the sense it's like Aboriginal people in our country we know have been there for 80,000 years, but it was just over a couple of hundred years that England came and invaded the country and wiped out a lot of Aboriginal people, the practices of genocide. And from that, putting Aboriginal people into missions and then now, pipelining, taking their children, the state takes the children, pipelining them into child protection, child safety, state authority, and then into youth prisons and then into the adult prison. So our Aboriginal population is around 3% nationally, but we have over 30% of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are in our prisons. So mass overrepresentation of our First Nations people in our country. So we have to take that into account. The other thing that happens is as discussed before, it's the issue of capitalism. It's about the haves and have-not. It's about racism. It's about neoliberal practices. And so, of course, we see the most marginalised, most impoverished pipelined into any form of incarceration. So it really doesn't matter who's in power because they all do the same. And what those in power, political power, have taken from the USA is the law and order auction. And the grip is so strong now that when there's elections, what happens is, who's going to be the tougher on crime? And they're the ones that usually get elected in. So whether they're left-wing persuasion or right-wing persuasion, but it's about instilling the fear in community that, you have to be fearful of the other, those that are criminalised. And, capitalism did a great job, and politicians and those in power, the corporations, to instill that in us all, I think, around the world, is that we value property more than people. And so we see people as disposable. And at home, we see Aboriginal people, Torres Strait Islander people, particularly women, they're the fastest growing group, as well as girls that are being incarcerated as the most disposable. And then, of course, we see the Aboriginal men and then poor white people. Yes, it does influence. It actually, they create more laws to criminalise more people and imprison more people, and that's about controlling and dividing the haves and the have-nots even more. Yeah.
Wow.
I'll leave it
Thank you. If I close my eyes and I didn't know it was you, Debbie, I would think you were describing what's happening in the U.S.
Yeah.
The parallels are so frighteningly similar. So I will turn to you, Teresa. The same question. How does the political climate in your country impact who is criminalized and what acts are criminalized?
Okay. So it definitely plays a huge role. But before we even go into the current situation, we've got to understand the history of where we've come from. We had a system that worked perfectly well before the English person landed in our country and said to us, this system doesn't work, this system is not good for you. We had a system where we did things that worked for our people. And then they came and changed everything to suit themselves. And now we've adopted this system that doesn't really suit our culture. It really doesn't suit us as a society. And they took some of our sisters and our brothers and they brought them here. And we've seen that even after they brought them here, they're still not treating them well. And while we're back home, they are coming to control who gets to power, because every time we're about to hold elections, Big Brother is watching, saying that we want it to be democratic, but they're interfering because they have their interests in our countries of whatever it is they want, and so decide who comes into power. But now the problem is when they came in, they divided us. They put boundaries of what we call provinces, which we didn't have. We were one people, one language, same food. I mean, we were all the same, but they came, divided us, put these boundaries, and now what has come up is this beast called corruption, which is eating us left, right, center. And the problem is whoever comes into power, I mean, they're so corrupt, there's no rule of law. But you've got to understand that the history of where we've come from is what is eating us. And yeah, we're criminalizing women, we're criminalizing the poor, we're criminalizing everybody except those who are in power. And to be honest, they're being protected. They're being protected by Big Brother who has interests down there. So it's really mixed up. It's really, really mixed up. And who's paying the price? It's we, the common persons in our country. We, the common people who are building that country, who are working in those farms, who are working in those mines, but they'll come and they want to take all our natural resources, and then they'll pay a few coins here and there to the people who are in power, leave us impoverished, take the best out of our countries, yeah? And then, yeah, I mean, it's got to stop.
Okay. So it sounds like it's the same familiar isms: the capitalism, the neocolonialism, the imperialism, the racism that Debbie mentioned. Did I leave anything out? The same roadmap, right. Some of us have been well drenched in that roadmap. So, last but not least, the political climate in Palestine, I'm sure there's a lot you can tell us about how that impacts who's criminalized and for what. So take it away.
Yeah, wow. I'm going to try to make it as simple as possible by going back in time. I mean, first of all, we all know that Palestine is controlled, the political scene in Palestine is controlled by the occupation of Israel since 1948, especially when the first and second intifada broke down, when people decided to resist the occupation, the killing of workers and all of that. Especially in the 2000, the second intifada, there was a great measure of a great major role of women to resist the occupation, that they did not see that coming. At that time, the occupation forces and the soldiers would take all the men to prison and would leave the women and children at home, believing that women are not going to do anything. But then they realized that the women have managed to make a great political movement, that they even at some point pretended to be men. They told everyone it's run by men, but nobody knew that it was all women that are like running, and the BDS movement and all of that happened because of women. And starting from this time, the Israelis have started taking actions to imprison women for political reasons. And they created the concept of like administrative detention, which is to take people in general, mostly women, put them in detention for God knows how long, and for no particular reason. And this is what it's mean. It's just like no reason. They're not criminalized or anything. It's just that the occupation want to shut them up. So this is how the imprisonment of women started. It was just like major in 2000. Right now, it's just, I mean, it's a very complicated situation. As you know, what is left of Palestine now is Gaza and the West Bank. And you have the Palestinians in Israel called like the 48, or they call them the Arabs of 48, or as we call them, the Palestinians of 48 land where the Israel 1948 took Palestine. And those people stayed in Israel as second level citizens. So currently, Palestine is ruled by three systems. You have the government of Hamas is controlling Gaza, where I come from. You have the government of the Palestinian Authority, or what's called the political movement Fatah, is controlling the West Bank, and you have Israel controlling all of these people. So this makes three systems of imprisonment that people have to go through. And a lot of times if like Israel would take someone, they would put them in prison, and then they would release them, and then the Palestinian Authority would take that person after 2 days, and they would imprison them. And everyone has their own political reasons. So if you oppose one government in the West Bank, if you oppose like the Palestinian Authority while you're in the West Bank, they accuse you of being like informer for Hamas in Gaza, and they would imprison you. And it's the same in Gaza, and Israel is the one that is taking more of like the political prisoners. So they take the women where they take children, they take old women, they take activists, they take everyone. They stop women on checkpoints if they can, just because she's wearing a hijab or anything, or just like they would accuse her of holding a knife or anything. A lot of false accuses have put women in prison for administrative detention that they did not do anything, and they would just keep them there. They would humiliate them. And as I just like want to just like clarify that Israel is using the like this system of masculinity and patriarchy in our society against us, even though that they have one of their own, but they use it against us because, you know, like they would say like Arabs care more about that. So if they want to put any pressure on any activist or any like someone from someone that they want, or any like leader or anything, they go and they arrest the woman. They abuse his mom, they abuse his wife, they humiliate them in prisons so that people would actually respond to them. And this is how people get imprisoned in the Israeli prison. In Gaza, it's just, in Gaza, it's just, Gaza and Palestine in general runs by Islamic Sharia law. So there is no law that protects women from rape, from violence, from being killed. So you can kill, like it's easy to kill a woman, your sister, your mom, anyone, for any reason, and you just go and defend yourself by saying it's a crime. It's just like to defend the honor of the family, and this is accepted by the Sharia, by the Islamic Sharia law. So there is no law that protects women, and that makes women you would hear a lot of women would kill their husbands because they got fed up, and they know if they either in prison or being killed at the end, or like being abused their whole life. And this is how women are criminalized because of the oppression that they face. First of all, from the occupation. You know, Palestine also, in Palestine, women are more likely to get killed than get imprisoned. So first from the occupation, and then from the society, the Sharia law that is not protecting women at all, and it's just like allowing them to be abused and killed and murdered or anything. And third of all, it's just poverty. Poverty. Look at like my city, Gaza has nothing right now. It's been under siege since 2006. Currently, women, children, everyone is living on the street, so they do all kinds of crimes. The only thing that they allow in the countries now is, like for the past at least 5 years, was drugs. So women, and they would just smuggle drugs from tunnels, and people started trading this stuff, and women would get addicted. They would do crimes based on these drugs, or they would sell them, and they would end up in prison. And a lot of women would go to prison to cover up for their children who are using or selling with the drugs, because she prefers to be in prison rather than having her children be in prison. It's a more complicated, it has more details and sides to it. So it's a really big thing that I can't just say everything, all sides of it right now, but that's as simple as good.
Wow, thank you, Walla. The next question really is going to be focused towards Teresa and Debbie. And I'm going to start with you, Teresa. You started Clean Start. And as I understood your description of Clean Start, it focuses on helping women, I'll say reintegrate women and their children. First, I'm going to ask you if you could explain a little bit about this phenomena that the child, your daughter, was with you inside, and why is it that you decided to focus your energies on what's happening with women after they come out of prison? And so, Debbie, that you have a heads up, then I'm going to ask you, for Sisters Inside, you decided to focus on the conditions that women are facing while they're incarcerated, which is a little bit different. So I'll ask you, following Teresa's explanation, why you focused in that way. Teresa?
Yeah. Okay. So just to give you a little bit of context, I was a banker for like a whole decade, working with international banks and growing my career. And then the corruption hit one of those days and money was stolen. And after money was stolen from the bank, the prosecutors came to me and arrested me and said to me, "Can you give us $10,000 and we will not arrest you?" And I was like, "I've not stolen any money. I have done nothing. How do you walk into the banking hall and just say to me, give us $10,000 cash and you won't arrest me?" Anyway, that's the order of the day. And I said, "I won't pay the $10,000. So they said, "Come with us." And off the banking hall and into this police cell. And, the following morning went to court, pleaded not guilty, and was remanded. Eventually, I managed to pay the cash bill that I had been asked for after a couple of, relatives, friends came together, put the money together and paid my cash bill. And so I got out and started fighting this case. And yeah, patriarchy. You're a woman, so you're useless. You cannot speak, you cannot argue, you don't have rights, and you're like a taboo if you're a woman and you're speaking up. But you've got to fight, you've got to push. I mean, you're a human being. And I chose to fight. Closer to judgment, they come to me again and they say, "This time round, we want $50,000. And I'm like, "You do not have any evidence whatsoever." But the corruption in the judiciary system, I mean, if you've got the money and you're guilty, you'll pay and you'll walk. And the victim won't say nothing. Nothing. Even if the evidence is in black and white. I mean, you can get away with anything as long as you can pay your way around. But if you're poor and you don't have the money, too bad. Even if you're innocent, you're going in. So they say to me, "So $50,000 and you walk." And but there's no evidence. You have no evidence. And they say to me, "Fine." So judgment day came and I was convicted. And they say to me, "Well, it was either $50,000 cash or you're in." So when I was inside, I came to find out that, having been in the corporate world, I really didn't understand, all the statistics I used to see. And that's the issue about getting close to the people who are affected. I would read in the newspapers, unemployment rates in Kenya are so high, 50%. The poverty rates, half the population in Kenya is living below the poverty rates. And I'd be like, "Oh my goodness me, who are these people?" And then, national exams would come and they would say half the people who sat the national exam are the ones who got places to join high school. The rest just didn't get places. And I was like, okay. And then you think it's them. It's them because for you, things are working. So when I got to prison, and I had just been blessed with my daughter, who I named Truth and Justice, because that's all I prayed for all the time. Like, we've got to fight this. Just let the truth and justice prevail. So I named my daughter Truth and Justice, and Truth and Justice had to come with me into prison. What an irony. So when I got into prison, the first thoughts that I had were, I've got to protect myself from those criminals in there. I have to find a way of protecting myself with my daughter. But when I got in, They were the most loving women I had ever met. You know, this is where you'll sleep. This is your food. Okay, it's pig style kind of food, really bad. And, you know, they really helped me to adjust to prison life. And I started asking myself, these are not the criminals I expected to find in prison. And as months passed by, I mean, everybody knew I was the bank thief because it was in the newspapers, it was on TV. So when I arrived, they knew the bank thief is here. Yeah, where's the money? I didn't steal. Yeah, everyone here. No one has committed the crime. Get on with it. But I was like, seriously, what did you people do? And as I spoke to the women, so we were like 60 mothers in this small cell who had our children with us. And it was just like hell, children crying throughout. And I had never experienced anything like this. So I started finding out, so why are you here? Why are you here? And the stories were, I never got an opportunity to continue with my education. And it started ringing a bell. Oh, the people who do not get places to continue with school, this is them. Those statistics you read about, these are those people. And it started making sense about the high unemployment rates, the poverty, you know, half the population lives below the poverty line. The corruption started making sense. A particular leader embezzled so much billions and walked, you know, that was meant for education, for health, for whatever. And it started making sense that, all those vices affect people, and the people who get affected are these people. Most of them didn't have legal representation, had been on the streets hawking to make ends meet, to take some food back home, and they got arrested. Why? Maybe the license was not valid, just something like that. But none of them left home going to commit a crime. They left home to go look for food to bring back to their children. They got arrested. They're in this maximum facility serving sentences, and their children are in the streets someplace because we do not have social, whatever it is you call social service, that comes and takes the children and then puts them someplace. We don't have nothing like that. So when you get imprisoned as a woman, your children are left on the outside. It's well-wishers, it's neighbors, it's, you know, people who will come and take your children and help them. The good thing with our society is that if I notice my friends, you know, my neighbors' children are, you know, don't have care, I'll sort of try to step in, you know. So a lot of these women had so much trauma about, I don't know where my children are, you know, and you would feel their anguish. But what hurt me the most was they would leave and come back. They would leave and come back. And I just couldn't wait to leave this place. It was hell. And then seeing them crying at the gate because there's no home to go to. It's the same streets. They don't know where to start. It's the same story. And so they're going to come back here because we do not have halfway houses. We do not have, there's nowhere for you to go. You're out in the streets by yourself. And so it was the absence of halfway houses, seeing that it's the lack of rigor representation, it's the education that's not equal for all, and how health and the corruption within our judicial system. While serving that sentence, I just say to myself, something's got to give. My friends would come and they would actually think I was mental because they'd come and I'd be like, no, I'm fine, I'm okay, but this is what we need to do. And at that time, they were like, what happened to you? But it's seeing the conditions that our sisters were subjected to. My daughter took a bath 3 times that 1 year because there wasn't water, water wasn't flowing every other day. And then, just the conditions. So it's seeing the realities of what that was like and what it was like for these women when they left these prisons that pushed me to set up Clean Start. And so the focus mostly was what they do when they leave, because that's where we have nothing. No halfway house, no jobs, really nothing. And I want to acknowledge the milestones you've made in your country. You've come a long way. And I want to challenge you to appreciate the people who were like us, who started, who worked on the foundations when there was nothing, because it's really, really hard trying to fight the very deep, many layers. Because you cannot look at issues of imprisonment, advocacy, creating awareness. You cannot look at that space alone. For us, we've got to look at the very many layers that are affecting this. So it's just a huge mountain, and it's too much work to be done. But for you in America, at least there's some milestones ahead. But it's a blessing for us to be, the ones starting this work. Even though, like my colleague said here, it's very risky. You could be killed any minute. It's very, very risky. It's your life on the line because you're putting yourself out there, and it's not really safe. So we focused on the outside a lot for the women, the girls, and the children, because there's pretty much nothing. And that's where we need most of the support and help to ensure that they do not go back into those institutions.
Wow, thank you, Teresa. Well, it's hard to imagine that things are better here. But
it's hard.
Yeah, but thank you for that reality check. Debbie, tell us about Sisters Inside.
Sure. So Sisters Inside, I think I said before or last night, was founded out of a group of women when I was in prison. And I suppose we need to go back a little bit further in history. So the last time I was in prison, I was looking at being sentenced to life imprisonment for drug trafficking. But when I came into prison, it was like coming home, because all the women in there, we were all together in the youth prison. So when we just, as 13-year-olds, all grew up together in youth prison and then ended up over in the adult system. One Sunday afternoon, my friend was stabbed to death, sitting beside me, as close as Teresa's sitting beside me now, and I was stabbed trying to stop that. So when we came back, we were all taken to the hospital. When we were brought back, Debbie, obviously, her name was Debbie too, didn't come back. She had died at the hospital. But Storm, who actually murdered her, was also brought back to the prison. And prison officers, the screws, we call them, they could just go home. They go on stress leave. We had to stay in the prison and live with the murder that just occurred in the prison. But what had happened was, so a whole heap of professionals, or what we call home do-gooders, came in to assist the prison, because it was the first time that really women in prison was ever heard of across our country, because there wasn't very many women in prison. Even today, like, women in prison don't hit the radar that much because, there's less of us than men in there. So it was all over the national media. It even made international media that a woman in prison had murdered another woman in prison. So all the do-gooders, they got rid of all the management, all the do-gooders, the professionals, the experts, the researchers, whatever you call them, all white, come running into the prison to assist us. And they assist us and telling the management what we needed. No one asked us ever what we needed. Yeah. But those of us who've been in prison, you know the rules of the game. If someone hurts your mate, payback's on. So, and it's only that these professionals came in and wanted to set up a mediation at that time between me and my mates and Storm and her mates. We agreed because we were actually going to go there and kill Storm and her friends in the chapel. So we were armed with knives.
Did you say in the chapel?
In the chapel.
That's what I thought you said.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
That was the only meeting place.
Yes,
So,
okay.
And, these nice white professionals were organising a meeting for us to sit down calmly and have a conversation. Had no idea about prison culture and the violence of prison and what payback means inside a prison. So it's only that this one old screw, a prison officer, when we went walking to the chapel, said, "What do you think you're doing? Where do you think you're going?" "Oh, we're going here to do mediation." "Yeah, be fucked you are, get." And he told us to go away. And so obviously that never happened. But something for us that we learnt is that we always had everyone else telling those in authority about what we needed, and no one ever asked us, ever. And so when I was released on parole and came back in to the Life as a Long-Termers group, and we started Sisters Inside, one of the first things, our first aim was to give a us a voice, that we needed a voice no matter what, and that we would fight for the voice because no one would ever hear us and no one would ever listen to us. And I think now, over 20 years on, we've got a voice, very powerful voice, I would say, too, in our country, because we actually, we're like, we're like a dog with a bone. We don't let it go. But I mean, so initially when I came out of prison, yes, it was about service provision and the conditions inside the prison, because they're all my mates, like we're all mates and this is what we need inside, and that's what drove us. It was a few years later on that one of the women who was pregnant in prison was calling out for help. She was having pains, and the nurses said, have some Panadol, go away, you're right. They left her. The prison was shut down over lunchtime so the screws could go and eat their lunch. And the women were screaming out for help because she was in agony. And, this gets distressing still. That's all right. She gave birth and the baby was born in the toilet bowl. But what they did then was they didn't call an ambulance just then. They got the screws to come up and clean up all the blood in the toilets, because really it should have been deemed a crime scene. And they didn't do that. They cleaned everything up. Then they called the ambulance. The ambulance come. They put mum on the trolley bed with wheels to take her out of the prison. They took the baby out of the toilet and snapped the baby in half, put it in a bag and threw the baby like between her legs in a garbage bag. So it was that point that all of us were like, we'd seen some things in our lives in prison, even where like a murder of my friend, but that was what we'd say the icing on the cake. That was the fucking end for us, and that we were looking for other answers. And it's only not long after that one of our first international conference, I reached out to Angela Davis. I didn't know who Angela was. I'm in Australia. Someone said, it'd be good to get Angela Davis to speak. I'm going, who's Angela Davis? And they're going, you'll never get her to come. I said, no, I'll just send her an email. She's been in prison like me. She'll be right. Anyway, and so I did send her an email, and she did respond, and she did come. And Angela and I have been close sisters ever since. Last night when she was on the screen, her and I were texting each other. She was in London, but she'll be here next week. But anyway, so... But when Angela came, because we were struggling because we were so institutionalised, because that's what happens to us when we grow up in the carceral state and within those structures, that we're so institutionalised it's hard to raise our head and look around and see what's going on really in the world, to have an analysis, like obviously we do now. And so Angela came and and as Angela said last year when she was at home at our conference in November last year, she was talking about when we first met, and she didn't know where she was coming. She'd never been to Brisbane, but here her and Gina were at the airport, and here's this white woman with blonde hair that drove a big black pickup truck, picked them up, and she's like, I get that now. I wouldn't have got it back then. Do you know what I mean? What it means here in the USA. Do you know what I mean? The white blonde woman in the black pickup truck, I get it now. So we all laugh now, like, yes. And Angie's like, oh my God, what the hell have we got ourselves into? But we've been, besties ever since. But Angela connected the dots for us. She came to Australia and connected the dots and gave us the analysis and the understanding of abolition and the prison industrial complex. And that's where we shifted. So we still do fight for the conditions, about the conditions inside the prison, but we argue that those services must be in the community. And even though Australia takes the US model, they say we need to build an old age, or a hospice in our prisons, because that's what the US does. And we go, no, we are not like the US. See, the majority of people in our prison will be released. And I know that, about 50% of people here in your prisons will never be released. And that's the tragedy. And that's the advocacy and agitation that must happen here. Where at home, everybody will be released pretty much unless they die in prison, right? Or get killed in prison. So it's different. So we don't want those health services or any of those inside prison. We want the women to be able to leave prison and access those services in the community. even if they're still serving time in prison. But I mean, the other issue we have a lot of women in prison on remand, so they don't get bail. Our bail system's very different. You have bail bonds. We don't have bail bonds. So we have over the last 2 decades, we have built a massive community, not only in our jurisdiction across the country, but around the world, but more so with the women who have been in prison, are in prison, and who now are grandmothers like myself, that we are growing up our own children and our own grandchildren so that they aren't criminalised and imprisoned. So that's a big piece of the work that we do all the time. And if you go to Nettery and Kim's session this afternoon, Nettery runs the Yanga program, so works with the girls who are in the watch house. What do you call the watch house here? Remand Centre, yep. Okay, so Nettery's in the Remand Centre, like we call them watch houses, police watch houses, and to support the girls and get them out. And we also have a decarceration program that works with the women in the watch houses as well to get them out, so they actually don't enter the prison system at all. Those women that do end up in prison, we basically, anything we do is from a decarceration position, the starting position always. We always think about everything we do so we don't net widen. We don't talk about reform. Reform is just, as we see it, rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. And anything else that you expand or think is a reform and think it's better because someone's not in prison means that it will capture and criminalise more people in the community. Like electronic shackling, yeah? Like home detention. Every home becomes a prison. So we advocate very strongly about not having that. We want the women out. We don't care what they've done at the end of the day, because a crime is theory, and a crime today that may not be a crime could be a crime tomorrow because politicians decide it is because of that behaviour. So we want the women home. So we do those decarceration strategies internally. So we run a Supreme Court bail program where we go to the Supreme Court and advocate for individual women to get them out on bail. And so probably the last 12 months, we've had at least 100 women released on that. We run a parole advocacy service, so we work with women who are due for parole and meet with the parole board regularly and advocate for them and get them out on parole when they're supposed to be out on parole and support them. We do a lot of work in the courts. We defend women, represent them. We have anti-violence workers because we know who's in our prisons. Women have been, physically, sexually, emotionally abused, not only individually but the state. So we have a campaign around strip searching. We see strip searching is sexual assault by the state. It's state-sanctioned sexual assault. Mm-hmm. And so we have that campaign running. More recently, like on the other side of the country, Western Australia, they still have old laws in place, laws where if you got a fine in court and didn't pay your fine because you can't because of poverty, you get a warrant and be put straight in prison.
Oh, that's like here.
And work the time off, yeah?
Yeah.
So what I did early this year in January is I got really pissed off one Sunday afternoon at home. And people that know me, I'm action orientated. So I think of things and then I just do them without then thinking. Then I sort of put the jigsaw puzzle together after. It's like, anyway, it works. But so what had happened? An Aboriginal man, dancer, cultural man, young man, actor, got arrested in Western Australia for unpaid fines of some 6 years ago. He was picked up for walking while black, and he was arrested because of the fines and put directly in prison. We were on social media and raised the money to have him released that afternoon. And then I thought of all the Aboriginal women because that are languishing in prison over there for non-payment of fines. And I remembered an Aboriginal woman, young Aboriginal woman, who was killed in a watch house in Western Australia. Miss Do, we call her. We don't use her name for cultural reasons. And her family called out because she was being assaulted in her home. But the police arrested her because she had a warrant for non-payment of fines. But her physical injuries were so bad that the police just called her a liar, attention seeker, you're a drugger, you're a drunk. Over the 3 days she was in the watch house in absolute agony because of all the internal injuries. They took her to a health centre twice. They agreed, you're just a druggo. All they had to do was take her temperature. That's all they had to do. They did nothing. And she died on the concrete floor in the watch house for unpaid fines. So there's been a lot of advocacy. So I was thinking of her dying like that, a coronial inquest 2 years later where the coroner said these laws must be changed. They still weren't changed. And they have a what's called supposedly a left-wing government in place that still hadn't changed the laws. So I started one of those GoFundMe pages, which is American-based. I didn't know until after it started. But anyway, I pitched it that I pitched it at white middle class to give up 2 coffees this week. If 10,000 of you give up 2 coffees this week, which would cost about $10, we could raise $100,000 to release 100 women. At that stage, I didn't Aboriginal mothers. I pitched it at because they're the women that are languishing in the prisons, and I didn't realise that the fines were going to be a lot more than $1,000. But that was a learning after. Within 36 hours, we'd raised $125,000. It just took off. And then, after 4 days, it was $250,000. Now it's 400,000. So we've released over 100 Aboriginal women out of prison that are in there and stopped Aboriginal women going into prison because we've paid their fines. And they can be home and they don't have to keep looking over their shoulders thinking that they're going to be arrested by the police and their children be taken. So we are a prison abolitionist organisation and we do that work. Yeah.
Thank you. So before I pose my last 1 or 2 questions, and I definitely want to get Luz and Walla back in the conversation, did everybody get their index cards? Yes, that's okay. So now's the time to start because we're going to end at 3:20, which means I'm going to give our panelists an opportunity to answer one more question, and then we're going to be taking the index cards from you. So if you have your question written, where's my card collectors? They've abandoned me. Okay. Okay. Do we have another card collector in the room? Okay. So we'll collect cards on this side and this side. So when you're done, just quietly just hold it up so the card collectors can start collecting them and going through them, okay? All right. So here's I think it's going to be our final question, so we have time to hear from the audience. And I'm going to start with Luz and then Walla, and then Deb and Teresa, you can join in as you like. And you can choose which of these 2 you want to address. Several of you have referenced the risk that is involved in doing this work. I'm going to ask you if you would elaborate on what that risk means in the specific in your country in advocating on behalf of women who are incarcerated. That's question number 1. Question number 2 is, do you think there is a possible role of international solidarity among organizations working on women and incarceration that would be of support to you in your work in your own country?
I try to answer both.
Okay.
Because there are many dangers, many risks to defenders in my country. But for this issue in particular, when it is about women that was in prison, there are no risks. Nobody wants to know about that. This is not a problem for the country. Unfortunately, nobody wants to know what happened with women was in prison. It's not a popular issue. And that is a very challenge for us because people want to be that the woman and men that commit a crime go to the prison, was incarcerated. So when we talk about abolitionism, they don't want to listen about that. But it doesn't mean that I was in risk. Nobody listened me about that. And the second question is, yes, I think that it's very important to try to do a world movement around this problem, because we listen the same problem in all of our countries. In Colombia also, the prison is a problem of poverty. and all of the most of the people that was in prison, the most of women that was in prison are poor. We have some figures that are in a recent research that was made with 2,058 women that was in prison because they, thank you, because of drug offenses. And it is clearly that they don't have any opportunity. It's the same in Kenya and Australia. It's poverty that are beside the decision of a woman to do a crime, or also the decision of the justice to criminalize this woman. But because the people that was in jail is not only the people that commit a crime. Many people commit a crime, but not all of them are in prison. The prison is for very specific people. It's for women that are in poverty. So some of the figures I have that result on this research show us that, for example, 73% of the women that was in prison for drug offenses has not complete secondary education. 70% of the women had no formal employment. They sell in the streets or they do domestic work in another houses. 48% women had been victims of violence, psychological violence, economic violence, physical violence, sexual violence. 17% of women had been victims of armed conflict. And also it is important to know that many of these women had her first pregnancy. 46% of women that was in jail had their first pregnancy when they were between 13 and 16 years old. So it is incredible that they are so young women. They are really no women, they are girls that is pregnant. More of this pregnancy perhaps became from a rape. And also it is important to say that the first, the 88% of the women have 20 years old or less when they have her first pregnancy. And all these figures show us that really we are in front of the most excluded women. This woman was in jail. This woman was in prison. These are the women that the system pursue in our country. So if we understand that, you say all in the morning, also in this afternoon, that the problem is capitalism, and not only capitalism, but the differences between poor and rich in our countries. In Colombia is a very strong problem. There are no work for women. The woman was the most poor into the poor of the country. They are more of them are homeless. No.
6% of women were homeless when they were convicted.
Yes, and 6% of women were homeless when they were convicted. So they lived in the street, no, when they are convicted. And I think that the experience of the organization in our countries can show us how to try to change this kind of solution of social problems. Because jail is a place to put people that don't want to be comfortable with poverty. It's to women that say, I don't want to see my child's death because they don't have how to eat. And she decided, well, I want to change that. I don't want to be happy without opportunities. I don't want to be happy having a house to live. I don't want to be happy with my situation. I want to change that. And there are many ways to change that. One of them was to be humiliated in a work where they don't have the minimum of the salary, or to do something that is not so bad for her, because sell drugs, for example, is not a crime. People don't want to have drugs, and it's a very free decision. I want to take drugs, so it's my decision. Nobody forced me to do that. So for women, this is not really a crime. This is a solution for her situation. But I don't only want to say that it's the only situation that could do to go out poverty. But we can do many things to change that. We can change policy on drugs. We can change the way who we try to resolve social problems. I want to say a figure in our country. Hectare. 1 hectare of land that was cultivated with coca cost 78 millions of pesos to destroy by a spray and herbicide that was very dangerous. 72 millions of pesos. For you have an idea, to the peasants that was agreed to change the cultivation of this kind of crop, they receive at the year 12 millions of pesos. So to destroy the hectare of a crop of coca, the government invests 72 millions. But to try that the peasant don't grow this plant, they only pay 12 millions of pesos. So if the investment of the government go to this kind of solutions and not to fight people, common people, we can change the situation.
Thank you.
It's government that demands the spraying of coca.
Yes.
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 Okay, so we have 5 minutes left. I promised Cameron that I could tell time. And so we have 5 minutes left. I know people have been collecting cards. Have you sifted through the cards? Okay, please collect them. What I'm going to do, I'm going to ask Walla, then Debbie, then Teresa in 1.5 sentences. Try that one, okay? To address one of those two questions, either the risk or how would, thank you, international support help you in the work that you're doing in your country? Walla, you're first. 1.5 sentences.
1.5.
Yeah.
Okay. Just first of all, it's not the support of my work in my country that I want people to support. I want people here to support the women in prison, the women who are forgotten. The whole international world knew about Ahed Tamimi, the blonde 16-year-old young woman that everyone was fascinated by her luck, by his strength. Did not hear the whole story of her being threatened to be raped and all of that. The international world already forgot about her, and she might be arrested soon because Israel cares about the U.S. media and the U.S. people and what they do. And I think people keep doing reminders that what's happening in there. And it's not just Ahed Tamimi, it's a lot of women who wear hijab, who don't look blonde or don't look like Ahed, that are there and forgotten and not known about, who get beaten and hospitalized, raped and stripped and treated like badly without seeing, and they're not allowed to see their families or their children or anything. And I want people to keep remembering them, send them letters, talk about them, because we all know that Israel does care about the US as their base support, and they care what you say. So this is what I'm asking the people to do always, to support the women themselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Walla. Okay, Debbie, 1.5 sentences.
No, it's a thing, sorry. I don't think it's about do we need support. I think it's about that we must organise because the carceral nation is organised, so we must dismantle the prison industrial complex. And those of us that have been in prison must lead that movement because we actually live it, we know it, and we have breathed it, continue to breathe it, and we're released. So we must organise together, those of us that have the experience, those that are living it, and those of you in the free world together to dismantle the prison industrial complex because, as I said, the carceral nation is organised, so we must get organised.
Okay, that was kind of 1.5 sentences. Okay. Okay. Teresa.
Yeah. I'd request for us to mean the words until she's free. Because your sister said, Audre Lorde, she said that you're not free if any other woman out there is not free. And thousands of women out there are not free. And I love the way Nkechi Taifa Nations, love your name. It comes from us. She gave this illustration of this train that has been, and the different faces. And yours left the station a long time back. Ours has just started. It's just taken off the station. And we're behind you. And all we're asking is, if you're not free until we're free, you've made some milestones ahead. All we're asking for is hold our hands and on the right path, because this beast, all it does is it just takes different shapes. Same script, different cast. So let us look at this in a unified manner. I mean, for us, we're looking at what are the ways we could solve the issues of entrepreneurship, of poverty, of research in this space. I mean, there's just so much we could do. Look at the advocacy you've done. How is it we could advocate for some of the changes we're looking at? Let us deliberate those things and work those together, because your train left a while time ago, and there have been so many people that you mentioned who have sacrificed their lives or who have contributed to this, and it's taking different forms even as you go ahead. So for us, and for, as I said, all my sisters back home in Kenya, in Africa, all we're asking for, first, thank you very much for including us in this Beyond Bars 2019. But what are the other platforms we can continue this discussion? We can partner and do much more together. Yeah.
Thank you. So I have a host of questions here on the cards. They're very, very thought-provoking. Several of the questions are speaker-specific. So what I'm going to urge you to do is come talk to them afterwards. So that will give us some sense of at least being out of the room by 3:30. But I'm going to, where's Cameron? He didn't hear that. Okay. So I'm going to share 2 broader questions that came from the audience. And if any of the panelists, and this time not 1.5, because I see what you all do with 1.5 sentences. That turns into 5. 1 sentence answers. We really have to do that, so that there is time for the audience to come up and talk to you afterwards, okay? So here are the 2 questions. The first one is, how do we not reinforce stereotypes about women as victims and vulnerable while advocating for their release? It's a thought-provoking question. And the second question, and Carlette, I'll give this one. How did you all have the courage and bravery to come share your truth despite the stigma? And what advice do you give to women who still feel ashamed or stigmatized by being formerly incarcerated? What advice would you give women who have been formerly incarcerated to do this work? Please pass this down. Okay. Sisters, 1 sentence answers. We all hold our breath to see how you would do that.
I think that when we talk about injustice against women and we say that they are poor and they are not in the good way, we don't strong stereotypes. We describe a situation. They are in prison because they have not power And that is not enforce stereotypes. That means that really we don't have power, and they hasn't at all power. This is a description, no a reinforcement of a stereotype.
Okay, thank you. We'll just come straight down. Debbie, you're next.
So I'll go to.
You can pick one, either
No,
one
I'll
of
go to the
those.
second question. I think because it's about institutionalisation. It is not our shame that we have been criminalised and imprisoned. It is the state's shame. So let's remove the stigma, the shame that the institutionalisation has given us and we have swallowed whole. Spew it out, throw it back, and let's go on the attack.
Okay. Teresa, one sentence.
I'll try. In Africa, we say we've got time, but I'll. So, the courage and bravery to come show here. Seriously speaking, we do not dare say I was in prison in Kenya. It's the last thing you will hear. Kathy came. Kathy Budin, thank you very much. She came, she met some of the women. We're trying our best to get that stigmatization off, because if immediately you say you've come from prison, your family will banish you. I served a sentence with this woman. She's now deceased. God rest her soul in peace. She's dead now with her son just because she was in prison. Stigmatization is still so rife. We are, oh my goodness me, they could kill you just because you're trying to advocate for other women who've come out of prison and because they feel you're talking against the government. But that's why I said we need your support. We need your support. All these other women and girls, and Kathy, thank you so much for coming to meet these girls and women. We need your support to encourage us to stand up and, hold up beyond bars where we're seen as people, So one step at a time, but a lot of support and encouragement to be able to speak up. It's not easy, but one step at a time.
Thank you, Teresa. That was one sentence. Thank you. Wala, the last word is with you.
Okay. Speaking of political prisoners, the fact that women were not in prison before is that the governments thought that the women are so weak and they shouldn't be in prison because they're weak, they're helpless, they can't do anything. And the fact that there is more political prisoners of women in prisons right now is a recognition of how women are powerful and they're resisting and they're doing stuff, and we can never victimize this. It's just like the system is what's trying to victimize the women, but they're not. They're powerful enough to be political prisoners, to be resisting and doing something that ended them up there. We advocate for release, but being a political prisoner is never ending. They keep imprisoning, taking them back to prison every time the world forgets about them. And this is not victimizing. This is a powerful woman doing something for their cause, for something like that. It's just not victimizing, of course.
Thank you. Would you join me in applauding these courageous women? We only went 5 minutes over. Okay, so if you have individual questions you want to pose to them, come on up, and then I think this room is going to be used for the next panel. Okay, 5 minutes. Run, ask, and disappear.